It is not enough. We stand in the dust at the end of centuries of useless sin and endless failure. The Legion was poisoned, and we sacrificed an entire world to cleanse it. We failed. We are the sons of the only Primarch to hate his own Legion. There, again, we failed. We swore vengeance on the Imperium, yet we run from every battle where we don't possess overwhelming force over a crippled enemy. We fail again and again and again. Have you ever fought a battle you'd struggle to win, with no hope of running away? Have any of us? Have you ever, since the Siege of Terra itself, drawn a weapon with the knowledge you might die? I will not see my life hoard away without meaning. Do you hear me? Do you understand me, Prince of Cowards? I want vengeance against a galaxy that hates us. I want Imperial worlds to cower when we draw near. I want the weeping of this Empire's souls to reach all the way to Holy Terra, and the sound of suffering will choke the corpse god on his throne of gold. I will cast a shadow across this world. I will burn every man, woman and child, so the smoke from the funeral pyres eclipses the sun. With the dust that remains, I will take the echo of damnation into the sacred skies above Terra, and rain the ashes of 20 million mortals down onto the Emperor's palace. They will remember us. They will remember the Legion they once feared. The conflict of the Horus Heresy would sunder many brotherhoods, oaths and loyalties within both traitor and loyalist ranks. Once proud warriors of distinguished legions would be rendered into tattered fragments of their former glories and allow bitterness to take root within their souls. For today we shall elucidate an Astartes of a legion bereft of kindness or mercy, resentful for the fruits of his labor and his legion's deeds, the inheritor of the Night Haunter's legacy, Talos Valkoren. To understand the story of the Soul Hunter of the Eighth, the fate of his legion's downfall is integral to his fate. Konrad Curze, the Night Haunter of Nostramo, would bring compliance to his homeworld through terror, torture, and public shows of violence. A world comprised of the most degenerate criminals in the known galaxy, the Nostramans of the planet shrouded in darkness would kneel to the tyranny of their new overlord and usher in a brief era of peace. By virtue of his intolerance of injustice, the Nostraman people would fear to commit even the slightest of sins, with the knowledge that reprisal from their Dark King would be swift and bloody. Yet with the arrival of the Master of Mankind to his homeworld, Konrad Curze would be installed to lead his legion, the Night Lords, to aid in bringing compliance to the galaxy. With their oppressor now departed, the Nostraman people would begin to succumb to their base desires, and once more allow for rampant crime to spread across their planet. Yet as Nostramo descended once more into anarchy, a young boy would begin his first steps as an aspirant to the 8th Legion. Spurred on by the hopes of his mother to become a valiant knight of the Emperor's Angels of Death, Talos would survive the unforgiving streets of his homeworld by joining a criminal gang as the planet further spiraled into violence. Succeeding in his trials to become a member of the Night Lord's Legion, the boy known as Talos would, alongside his stalwart friend, Zal, be installed as a member of the Night Lord's 10th Company as an apothecary of their elite First Claw. Gifted with precognitive visions akin to his gene father, Talos would see glimpses of the future and share sympathy for his lord's much clearer and overwhelming foresight. Watching his planet's destruction by the order of his Primarch, Talos would earn the favor of the Night Haunter during his service of the Great Crusade and become a member of his gene sire's inner circle of advisors. Yet with the dawn of the Horus Heresy, the Night Lords would begin their own downfall and reap the bitter rewards they so willingly would sow. The Night Lord's Legion, already feared throughout the galaxy for their desecrations across the stars, would be fitting tools for the now ascended War Master of Chaos. Aiding in the Dropside massacre of Istvan V, under the watchful eye of their Primarch and their infamous rally call of their first captain, Jago Sevatarian, the Night Lords would seal their fate as irredeemable traitors to the Imperium. Death to the false Emperor, they would chant, as their blades and bolters tore through the ceramite and flesh of the Imperium's stalwart defenders and martyred champions. The Night Lords had destroyed their homeworld in an attempt to cleanse themselves of their shame, yet within the minds of every Astartes of the Eighth, the memory of their origins would forever stain their resolve. Within the Sagwalza system, the Night Lords would harry the Dark Angel's Legion as the Framas Crusade waged for 3 solar years, incurring great casualties between the warring legions. Talos would tend to the wounds of his kin and retrieve the progenoid glands of the fallen on far distant conflicts, as his own Primarch and his honor guard of the Chiroptera fought against the Lion of Caliban and bloodied themselves with unadulterated, gleeful savagery. Yet despite the Night Lord's superior numbers, the discipline and martial prowess of the First Legion would prove invaluable, and in a last desperate act of defiance, the Night Haunter would attempt to slay the Lion of Caliban. Aboard the Dark Angel's flagship, the Invincible Reason, the Night Lords would be captured and separated from their Liege Lord. Yet the remainder of the 8th Legion under the command of the usurper of their fleet contingent, Gendor Scrivok, would join the War Master of Chaos in their assault of the Throne World. Few details are known of Talos' deeds during the Siege of Terra, yet what is known is that his men of the 10th Company, First Claw, would be among the first to breach the walls of the Imperial Palace. Captain Malkarian of the 10th Company would, despite his peerless skill in battle, be mortally wounded, and with the failure of the traitor war effort during the final hours of the siege, the Night Lords would retreat from the battle. Interring Malkarion within a dreadnought sarcophagus, Talos and his men would venture to the eastern fringes of the galaxy to escape the wrath of the Loyalist Purge of the Scouring. For upon Sagwalza, the Night Lords would tend to their wounds and forestall the final deeds of the Night Haunter. Seeing a vision of his Primarch upon the world of Sagwalza, Talos would lead his men to the war-torn and dreary planet. Reuniting with Konrad Curze following his ordeals upon Macragge and judgment by the Great Angel to fulfill his destiny, the Night Haunter would be tormented by his visions of his own demise. Confiding with Talos as to the fate of the Night Lord's Legion, Curze would address Talos as Soul Hunter for his preordained involvement in his own death. Foreseeing the Kalidas assassin, Shen, infiltrating their Carrion Palace, Curze would not take actions to hinder nor struggle against the agent of the throne. Ordering Talos and his men not to enact reprisal for his death, Curze would regardless know deep in his heart that his visions of Talos hunting the soon-to-be Godslayer following his murder would be inevitable. The Night Haunter would await the assassin upon his throne, adorned in his tyrant's crown, and accept death's embrace. Accepting the role of martyr to his legion, Curze would fall to the Godslayer's blade, and in so doing, abandon his legion to fall victim to yet another monumental mark of shame. Valkorin would pursue the assassin and achieve vengeance for his Primarch's death, fulfilling the Night Haunter's prophecy. One soul. You will hunt one shining soul, while all others turn their backs on vengeance. The Night Lords were now irrevocably bereft of hope. Their homeworld was ashes, their fleets destroyed, and now their own Primarch lay dead upon his tyrant's throne. The Night Lords would never recover to their prior strength, yet Talos would prove instrumental in their resurgence. As the 8th Legion fragmented into several warbands, Talos would serve under the rule of Vandred and Rafi. Known by his legion as the Exalted, the former sergeant of the 10th Company had allowed a demon of Tzeentch to possess his body and transformed into a Chaos Space Marine. As millennia waned, the remnants of the 10th Company would exist as scavengers and vultures of the galaxy, targeting military and civilian forces posing no threat to their own armaments and numbers. The Night Lords would strip the fallen dead for supplies and enslave their charges for use as serfs within their ramshackle fleet. Combating strike forces of loyalist Astartes chapters, Talos would claim pieces of their ceramite for use in repairing his own panoply of war. Marking his helm with the Nostraman insignia bearing his title as Soul Hunter, his duties as an apothecary would diminish with the loss of his Narthecium and lack of medical supplies befitting his role. Ritualistically shattering the Imperial Aquila upon his breastplate each time it required repairs, Talos would also claim the blade Aurum from the Blood Angels chapter. A venerated relic of the 9th Legion, forged during the Great Crusade, Talos would see the blade as a fitting prize for slaying its previous owner, Captain Dumas. A prize of both vengeful Blood Angels and duplicitous Night Lords, Talos would slay many Astartes of both the Angel and his own peers to remain its owner. A stalwart leader among his company, Talos would nonetheless grow weary of his warband's existence as the carrion feeders of the galaxy. Forming uneasy alliances with Abaddon the Despoiler during their millennia of strife, the Exalted would command his men to fight alongside the War Master of Chaos's forces during the Kryph campaign. Deployed as cannon fodder by the Despoiler, the Night Lords would stifle their indignation as the campaign continued to wage. Vandred had become fully controlled by the whim of the demon possessing his body, to which Talos would deem him unfit to command First Claw. Betrayed by the Black Legion, Talos would assume the command of the 10th Company as they fought for survival against their treacherous allies. Yet with the actions of the Black Legion, Vandred would overcome the demon within his body and, fueled by disgust at the Despoiler's actions, see to the retreat of his warband from the battle. Seeking aid to repair their damaged strike cruiser, the Covenant of Blood, the Night Lords would turn to another warlord of the ruinous powers, Huron Blackheart. Agreeing to aid the Night Lords in refitting and repairing their vessel, Huron would demand the Exalted to pledge his men to aid the Red Corsairs in their imminent raid of the world of Villamus. Agreeing to the Bloodreaver's terms, the Night Lords would discover that the Red Corsairs' fleet held one of their own Legion's warships, Thrall, within their ranks. The Echo of Damnation, the sister ship of the Covenant, languished as the Red Corsairs enslaved its machine spirit to serve their will. Plotting to retake their venerable warship, the Night Lords would join the vanguard of the assault on Villamus, until capturing their charge. Convincing the Red Corsair, Variel, to join their cause, the Flayer of the once Astral Claws would agree to betray his kin to absolve his shame for his rejection of his former ideals. Retreating from the Red Corsairs, Vandred would realize that to escape, they would need to sacrifice one of their vessels. Talos and his men would retreat to the Echo of Damnation and succeed in escaping the Bloodreaver's fleet, as Vandred, in a last act to control his own body, would sacrifice the Covenant to the guns of the Corsairs. Destroying half a dozen ships in his maneuvers, Vandred would relinquish full control of his body moments before the destruction of the Covenant of Blood, allowing his demonic entity to perish within his body alone and be banished into the warp. Now freed from the pursuit of the Red Corsairs and Black Legion, Talos would stand alone as the single most senior officer of the warband. The exiled was gone, yet now they commanded a new vessel outfitted with the notoriously potent armaments befitting the fleet of the Bloodreaver. Guided by visions to return to Sagwalza once more, Talos would order his warband to return to the site of their legion's death knell. Laying waste to the planet's colonists, long abandoned by the Imperium, the Night Lords would be beset by the Elder Craftworld, Ulfway. Seeing the Soul Hunter as a potential threat to their civilization, the Eldar under the command of the Phoenix Lord, Jain Zar, would bring their might to bear in order to crush the last remnants of the Nighthaunter's legacy. First Claw would be annihilated as many of its members fell in battle, as Talos and the so-called Voidstalker dueled upon the scarred world of Sagwalza. Allowing the Eldar to impale him through the chest with her spear, Talos would detonate a crack grenade in order to end both of their lives. Fatally wounding the Phoenix Lord, Talos' stalwart ally, Malkarion, would end her life and allow for the survivors of the battle to escape. Apothecary Variel, though wounded by Jain Zar, would retrieve Talos' body and aid in rebuilding the now doomed warband. Extracting the gene seed from Talos' body, the Flayer would craft a new prophet for the Night Lord's Legion. Implanted into the Astartes known as Decimus, the inherited foresight of the Nighthaunter would culminate in his prophetic vision to see the futures of all members of the Night Lord's Legion and see to his meteoric rise as the new leader of the 8th Legion. Armed with the Sword of Talos, Aurum, and the Bolter of Malkarion, Anathema, Decimus would lead his warband to aid Abaddon the Despoiler's 13th Black Crusade and bring the Eldar's fears of Talos' deeds to fruition with the assault of the Ulthwé Asuryani. Uniting the Night Lord's Legion as its disparate warbands across the stars pledged to serve the Prophet of the Eighth, Talos' legacy and that of his Primarch are now ensured to wreak untold misery and vengeance across the stars. For it is a legacy the Imperium shall be hard-pressed to destroy. He knew he was one of the slow children. That was the word his tutors used to describe the children that sat separate from the others, and he knew he belonged with them. In his class, 4 of the children were slow already. He formed the word in his mind with the same delicate emphasis the adults around him used when they said it, and the 4 of them sat by the window, often completely ignoring the tutor's words, yet never suffering punishment for it. The boy sat with them, the 4th and newest of the 4, and stared out of the window with the others. Cars passed in the night, their front lamps dull to ease any strain on the eyes. The clouded sky was hidden by tower tops, each spire decorated by great illuminated signs, selling whatever it was that adults felt they needed. The boy turned back to his tutor. For a while he listened to her speaking about language, teach the other children, the not slow children, words that were new to them. The boy didn't understand at all. Why were the words new to everyone? He'd read them in his mother's books a dozen times before. The tutor hesitated as she noticed him looking. Usually she ignored him, forgetting he was there with casual, practiced familiarity. The boy didn't look away from her. He wondered if she would try to teach him a new word. As it happened, she did. She pointed to a word written across the flickering vid screen and asked him if he knew its meaning. The boy didn't answer. The boy only rarely answered his tutor. He suspected it was why the adults called him slow. As the chime pulsed once, heralding the end of tuition for the night, all the children rose from the seats. Most of them packed writing pads away. The slow ones put away scraps of paper with children's drawings. The boy had nothing to pack, for he'd done little but stare out of the window all evening. This has been a tale of the Great Imperium of Man, read by the Remembrancer. Talos Valkoran would act as a paragon to his legion, following in his Primarch's footsteps, yet never forget that a martyr among murderers pining for justice is no true paragon, no matter the circumstance or bravery. For Decimus's reign shall be opposed, and his twisted quest for vindication thwarted. For the legacy of the Night Lords is an affront to the Imperium and its ideals, unworthy of redemption or penance.